The cold came through the cracks in the old warehouse walls like it owned the place, which, technically, it did, because Vesper Dunn hadn't been able to afford to fix the insulation since October, and October was a long time ago. She was on her knees on the concrete floor when she heard the cars. Not delivery trucks or the half-broken city bus that rattled past the Canfield district twice an hour. These were something else, low and heavy, the kind of engines that didn't announce themselves so much as warn you. Vesper set down the lead game she'd been shaping and pulled off her magnifying headset. She didn't run to the window. She just sat back on her heels and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She knew exactly who it was. The debt was her inheritance. The only thing her father had left her besides the kiln, the copper foil cutter, and 30 years' worth of handwritten restoration notes, she couldn't bring herself to throw away. $280,000 borrowed from men whose paperwork didn't go through any bank she'd ever heard of. She had been making payments on the interest for 2 years, which meant she had paid nearly $60,000 and still owed more than when she started. The rolling door at the back of the studio shuddered and groaned upward. 3 men walked in, 1 in front, 2 behind. The one in front moved like he was making a decision with every step, slow, deliberate, already done thinking about it. Nikolai Draven stopped 5 feet from her work table. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat and leather gloves, and the kind of shoes that had no business being on a concrete floor in a glass restoration studio. He was older than she'd expected. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken once and reset a little wrong. His eyes swept across the work table, the rose window panel she'd been piecing back together for 3 weeks, the tray of antique glass sorted by color and opacity, the small paper cups of solder she'd measured out that morning. "You do all this yourself," he said. "There are 4 of us." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. 2 are at a site job in Hamtramck. The other one quit last month when I couldn't make payroll. She straightened up off the floor. "So right now, yes." Draven's gaze moved to her face. He looked at her the way someone looks at a number they're not sure they trust. Not hostile, just precise. "Your father's note," he said. "It transferred when he died." "I know." "You're 2 months behind on interest." "I know that, too." One of the men behind him whined, with cropped grey hair and the expression of someone who had heard too many of these conversations, shifted his weight. His hand moved near his jacket. Vesper kept her eyes on Draven. "Take the equipment," she said. "The kiln alone books at about 90,000. There are 3 kilowatt UV lamps, a Fletcher glass cutter that's practically brand new, and about 40,000 in antique glass stock I can itemize by Friday. It won't cover the full note, but it's honest." Draven reached into his coat. He pulled out an envelope and set it on the edge of her work table, next to a piece of cobalt glass she'd been trying to match for 2 weeks. She'd been dreaming about that piece of cobalt, pulled from an 1890s window in a demolished Benedictine chapel in Grosse Pointe. Exactly the wrong shade of blue and completely irreplaceable. "That's the note," Draven said, "and the deed to this building. My associates purchased the lien from your equipment lender 6 weeks ago." Vesper's chest went tight. "What do you want?" she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. The 2 men behind him had gone very still. "A wife," Draven said. The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the wind working its way under the roll-up door. "There's a federal review," he continued, as if he were explaining a billing statement. "My operation is expanding into legitimate construction contracts. The committee doing the vetting doesn't trust bachelors. Specifically, they don't trust men in my line of work, who appear to have nothing to lose and no one to be accountable to." "Buy an actress," Vesper said. The shock had already curdled into something harder. "Hire someone. You clearly have the money." "I've had women in my life who wanted what my money could provide." His tone was flat, not defensive, just factual. That creates a different kind of liability. "So you drove to a glass shop in the Canfield district to find a bride." I came to a woman who has been managing a failing business on fumes and stubbornness for 2 years without asking a single person for help. He nudged the envelope slightly toward her. You marry me. We appear together at 4, maybe 5 events over the course of a year. You sign a prenuptial agreement that protects this studio and everything in it. The debt disappears. This building becomes yours, free and clear. You keep your name. He reached into his coat pocket and set a small velvet box on the table beside the envelope. The grey-haired man cleared his throat. Vesper looked at the box. She looked at Draven. My father borrowed that money because he was a romantic, she said. He believed in beautiful things. He bought kilns instead of paying rent. He restored windows for churches that couldn't afford him and told himself the work was its own repayment. She picked up the velvet box. That's not a criticism. He made things that mattered, but he left me holding the invoice for his faith, and I have been doing the math on that debt for 2 years. She set the box down on his side of the table and pushed it back. I am not going to solve one bad contract by signing another one. You don't understand what happens when you decline. I understand perfectly. She stepped back from the table. You take the equipment. You sell the lease. You move on to whoever's next on your list. And I figure out something else, because that is what I do. The younger man behind Draven, hard mouth, neck tattoo, the energy of someone always auditioning, stepped forward. You should think very carefully about. Birch, Draven said. The man stopped cold. Step outside, Draven said quietly, both of you. Neither man moved immediately. They looked at each other. Now, Draven said, 1 syllable, and it carried the weight of something much heavier. They left. The rolling door clanged back down. The studio went quiet except for the hiss of the gas line to the cold kiln and the sound of wind pressing against old glass. Vesper stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Draven did not issue a deadline. He did not reach for anything. He did not say another word about the debt. Instead, he pulled off his leather gloves and laid them on top of the envelope. He looked at the work table, more specifically, at the rose window panel she'd been assembling for weeks. 4 feet of reconstructed lead lines mapping out interlocking diamond shapes around a central figure she hadn't gotten to yet. He looked at it the way she'd caught herself looking at it, like a problem worth understanding. What happened to it? He said. A church in Corktown got sold for condos. The developer didn't want the windows. I bought what I could salvage. She watched him carefully. Why? He picked up a piece from the sorting tray, deep amber about the size of his palm, a hairline fracture running diagonally through the center. Can this one be saved? Not for a structural panel. I'd cut around the fracture and use the clean sections for infill. He set it down carefully, with a precision she hadn't expected from a man whose hands had likely done much worse things. He looked at the floor beside the work table, the knee pads, the portable light box, the bins of sorted lead strip. Then he took off his overcoat. He didn't hand it to anyone. He folded it over the back of a stool. Show me what to sort, he said. Vesper stared at him. I'm not leaving, Draven said. He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at the bins. I'm not taking your equipment, but I'm also not standing here doing nothing while you sort glass and wait for me to threaten you again. He turned. Show me what goes where. She spent the first 20 minutes convinced it was a manipulation. Some long-game tactic designed to unnerve her more completely than any threat would have. But Draven did not try to make conversation. He did not move closer to her. He pulled a stool up to the secondary table, picked up a piece of greenish glass she'd meant to catalogue for a week, and held it under the work light. He waited. Pale green goes in the 3rd bin, she said finally. But check for iridescence first. If it catches the light at an angle, it might be dichroic, and that goes separately. He tilted the glass, checked it twice, put it in the 3rd bin. She handed him a sorting sheet. He worked through the pile methodically, without being told anything twice. By the time the light outside the grimy windows had shifted to the grey-orange of a Detroit winter evening, he had sorted 2 full trays and correctly identified 3 pieces she hadn't realized were dichroic. She set a mug of coffee on the table next to him without saying anything. He wrapped both hands around it. "My father ran numbers," he said, not like he'd planned to say it, like the words had just found a way out. Not for himself, for an operation on the East Side. He was good with figures. They paid him in cash and kept him with threats, which is a common arrangement in that industry. He took a drink. He died owing them more than he'd ever made. There's a version of that story that ends with me sorting glass in someone else's studio for the rest of my life. Vesper said nothing. She was studying the cobalt piece she'd propped against the lightbox. Still wrong. Still the wrong shade of blue. "Your father believed in beautiful things," she said finally. "Mine believed in the next number, the next sure thing. He told me every month that he was close, that one good contract would square everything." She set the cobalt piece aside. "He died in February. His close was about $1 million away." Draven put down the mug. "Why did you stay?" he said. She looked at him. "This is my work." "It was your father's work." "It's mine now." She picked up the cobalt piece again and turned it in her fingers. "Someone has to finish what was worth finishing." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up the sorting sheet and went back to work. He left at 9 o'clock. He did not take the envelope. He did not bring up the debt. He thanked her for the coffee in a voice that sounded like it had not used that phrase recently enough. She locked the studio door and stood with her back against it in the dark and just breathed. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. He wore different clothes, nothing that announced itself. He learned which solder iron ran hot and which one lied about its temperature. He learned to score glass without pressing too hard. On the third day, he picked up a piece she'd set aside and asked why she wasn't using it. And she said the color was wrong for the current restoration, but right for something else she'd been planning for a year and hadn't started. He said, "Then start it." She almost told him it wasn't his business, and then didn't because he wasn't wrong. It was a Thursday afternoon when the van came. She was in the back sorting lead strip when she heard the side door open, then the sound of something overturning, glass hitting concrete, voices that weren't his. By the time she reached the front of the studio, 2 men she didn't recognize had upended 2 of her sorting trays and put a crowbar through the rose window panel. 3 weeks of work, the Corktown salvage, lead lines she'd spent 4 months sourcing glass to match. The bigger of the 2 looked at her. "Tell Draven the West Side arrangement is finished. Tell him what a message looks like." Then they were gone. She sat on the concrete floor for a long time. She did not cry. She looked at the broken lead lines and the scattered glass and the pieces she could name and the pieces she couldn't, and she breathed very carefully through her nose, and she did not cry. Draven was there within the hour. He looked at the floor. He looked at her. He made no promises she wouldn't believe, which was the first thing she thought she might actually respect him for. "I'll handle it," he said. "I don't want anyone dead because of my studio," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, understood. He was gone for 5 days. She worked. She swept up the salvageable glass and began the brutal process of resourcing what was gone. She got an estimate from a fabricator in Toledo for matching the rose window's lead pattern, twice what she had. She put it in the folder she kept for things she'd figure out later. On the 5th morning, a woman she didn't know came to the door with a package. Inside was a folder of documents. The operation that had sent the 2 men, she didn't know the name and the paperwork didn't offer one, had been severed from 3 city contracts. Their insurance policies had been cancelled across 7 properties. Their primary distribution agreement had been pulled by a supplier they apparently could not afford to replace. Nobody had touched them physically. They had simply been made structurally impossible to sustain, the way a window fails when the lead matrix is compromised, quietly, completely, from the inside. She was still holding the folder when Draven's number came up on her phone. "It's done," he said when she answered. "I heard. I wanted to make sure you knew it was done without." "I know how it was done," she said. "I have something to say to you. Come here." He came alone the next morning. He stood in the middle of the studio floor and looked at the swept concrete and the rebuilt sorting trays and the section of the rose window she had already begun reconstructing, one piece at a time. "You paid the debt," Vesper said. She was at the work table with a new piece of cobalt in her hand, from a supplier in Pittsburgh who'd finally found her the right shade. "Before you ever came here, you paid my equipment lender 6 weeks before you walked through that door." Draven said nothing. The envelope, the deed, the building, it was already a gift. She set the cobalt down. "You dressed it up as an ultimatum because you knew I'd throw a gift in your face. You needed me to push back against something." He looked at the panel. "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for long enough that she stopped expecting an answer. "I have spent 20 years in rooms where everyone wanted something from me," he finally said. "Fear or money or protection. I walked into your studio and you wanted me gone. That was it, just gone." He looked at her directly. "I didn't know how to talk to that, so I gave you a fight, because it was the only language I knew." Vesper picked up the new cobalt piece. She held it against the light box. The color was right. Finally, exactly right. "I'm not offering you nothing," she said. "I'm offering you a fair exchange. You want someone who will tell you the truth in a room full of people who won't. I want a business partner with infrastructure and actual cash flow because I am very good at what I do, and I am exhausted from doing it on nothing." She pressed the cobalt into its place in the panel. It fit. Equal standing. Full transparency about anything that touches this studio or my name. "You don't hide things from me to protect me. I don't need that kind of protection." Draven walked to the work table. He reached into his jacket and placed the velvet box between them. He didn't open it. Vesper reached out and opened it herself. The ring was simpler than she'd expected. Platinum, a single stone, nothing that announced itself too loudly. She looked up at him. "I'm going to need help resourcing the glass for the rose window," she said. "I know a fabricator in Cincinnati," Draven said. "They owe me a conversation." Knowing a fabricator is not the same as knowing how to source antique glass. "No," he agreed, "but I'm a fast learner." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count. "You said so yourself, 3 days ago." She thought about the sorting sheet. She thought about the dichroic glass he'd spotted before she had. She thought about a man who dismantled operations for a living, sitting on a stool under her work light, tilting amber glass toward the lamp with the same careful attention she'd been teaching herself for 15 years. She put the ring on. Outside, a December wind moved through the Canfield district, and the warehouse walls made their sounds, the way they always had. But she had already begun to recalculate what the building could hold.